Every Easter, I usually sit at home and enjoy my day off, then go to the store and buy all the discounted chocolate. But this year, my friend, Nathan, invited me to his family's annual Easter party. He just needed a plus one, and he mentioned that there would be an all-you-can-eat buffet, so I was automatically sold. We drove down a forest for a long time, and I noticed that there are no houses for miles. He explained to me that his family spreads eggs all throughout the woods, and that the kids usually don't finish until nighttime. I found the idea pretty strange, because who takes Easter to that extent? When we approached the home, all the kids were outside, surrounding someone in a bunny costume. Despite the rest of the family members dressed in fancy clothing, the bunny costume looked kinda low quality. Before I could get a closer look at the bunny, Nathan led me inside to say hello to his extended family. Even from the first glance, I could tell that this wasn't an ordinary family. They had some sort of strange aura to them. They asked me normal questions at first, like where I went to school and if I had a job. Then, the questions started to get more strange. Like, what's your biggest fear? Or, do you believe in God? The questions were red flags, but I thought they seemed more noisy than dangerous. After a couple of awkward conversations, it was time to start the Easter egg hunt. Everyone gathered around outside, as Nathan's grandfather stood between us and the forest. He let out a whistle, and all the kids charged towards the dark woods. Even though Nathan and I were much older than them, his family insisted we participated too, because of how many eggs were spread out. So I raced into the forest too, leaving him behind. Most of the eggs were hidden in obvious places, so my bag filled up pretty quickly. I was in the middle of clearing an area, before I heard leaves crunching. I paused and stood still, then began hearing whistling, coming from deeper in the woods. Through the unsettling silence, I realized a little further down the path was a cave. I thought this would have been a really good place to hide eggs, so I walked inside to explore. The cave was dark and twisted unnaturally, so I used my phone flashlight to brighten up the path. Instead of finding Easter eggs, I came across something that chilled me to my core. It was a creepy Easter egg bunny from before. As soon as we made eye contact, I sprinted out of there. I've never run that fast in my life. After feeling like he was off my tail, I sat down and caught my breath behind a tree. Before I knew what was happening, the bunny's head popped out from the other side. I really thought I was about to get murdered in those woods. Instead, it put an egg into my hand and uttered two words.
Open it.
I was reluctant and unsure of what the bunny was getting out of this. Sick pleasure? I opened it slowly and watched as a still wet human eyeball fell out and into my hand. This time, I couldn't hold in my scream. The man in the costume slowly lifted up his mask, revealing his equally horrified face. That's when I realized he wasn't the bad guy here. The bunny pointed north and told me to run as far as possible until I came across the road again. After that, I just needed to keep following it until I made it out of the forest. I turned around to see where he was pointing, and when I looked back, he was gone. Without missing a beat, I ran off towards the road in fear of what would happen if I stayed. By the time it got dark outside, I just barely made it back onto the path. My phone wasn't getting any service, so it was impossible to call anyone. However, I spotted a light shining down a dark path. It was a car driving down the road. So I ran out into the street and waved my arms frantically. Surprisingly, the car stopped and let me inside. I thanked the driver, but she was silent. She asked me where I wanted to go, and I told her I was fine, as long as I got out of this forest. At first she kinda laughed, and joked about how creepy the woods were. I told her I couldn't agree more, and felt the adrenaline rush leaving my body. I was so exhausted from running all day that I ended up falling asleep during the car ride. When I woke up, she was parked back in the familiar driveway. A sinister smile spread across her face as she turned to me. "You said you wanted to get out of the forest, right? Why don't you come inside for some tea?" That's when I realized this was her plan all along. She was part of this sick and demented family. Even though I struggled, she yanked me by my hair and led me back to the front yard, where everyone started off. The kids' faces were stained with red, but I could tell they were still hungry for something more. Once I saw the empty Buddy costume on the floor, I knew there was no escape.
New father, and it was my family's first real walk in the woods. My 5-year-old Jay was thrilled about the fact that we were walking off trail today with walkie-talkies, and my wife liked that they had a static-proof 3-mile range. That allowed us to take our guard down while we were picking a load of morel and chanterelle mushrooms we stumbled across. When we looked up, Jay was gone. That was our family's first genuine bolt of true panic. We frantically called out for him on the walkie-talkie with no reply, then ran in the general direction that we thought our son had wandered, before finding his sticker-plastered radio on the ground. My wife cried out until her voice turned ragged, and I had to hold her. Just as the sun began to set, we were ready to dial 911. Jay walked out of the bush as he had been standing just outside of our view the entire time. His eyes were ringed with red, but the whites of his eyes remained clear. I had assumed it was just from crying. Besides, it didn't matter, we had Jay back. I carried him in my arms all the way back to our car. Jay was already asleep when I buckled him in. Right before driving onto the main road, my wife blurted out, "Jay's radio!" We left it on the trail. I didn't want to go back as it was already dark and I just wanted to go home. 2 minutes down the road, my wife's walkie-talkie barks. It's Jay's voice, frantic, crying, asking where we were. My wife and I looked at each other before looking at Jay in the back seat. We confirmed it was Jay on the other line as we turned around and told him to stay put. My wife stayed with the child in the back seat as I went to Jay. I found him near his radio, scared but glad to see me. I didn't bother asking him if he knew the kid that was in the back of our car. I thought we would sort all this out when we got back. When we did, the kid was gone, but my wife was still in the car. When she saw the two of us, a drowsy smile spread across her face, all except for her eyes. Her red, ringed eyes. Ever since I was young, I've looked in the mirror quite often. Maybe people probably assume it's vanity, but that's never been it. I'm a bit of a paranoid person, looking around corners, leaving lights on so I can see my surroundings, and checking under my bed just in case. I live alone now, which has made this paranoia worse. It was a Sunday, cleaning day. As I scrubbed the bathroom, I had to walk by the mirror to get a bottle of bleach for a stain that had been bothering me for a long time. I still feel shivers thinking about the moment I realized my reflection didn't match myself. She looked afraid. Taking this as a bad omen, I left the room as is, not even bothering to finish cleaning up my husband's blood. I'm the kind of coworker everyone hates. I'm the coworker that steals from the fridge. I know it's rude and selfish, but everyone else's things just taste so much better than my bag lunches. Plus, I have to admit it's pretty funny at how upset my colleagues get when they notice things missing. They'll yell, "For Christ's sakes, it was labeled," and What kind of monster would do this? It got to be such a huge ordeal that the office set out on a witch hunt for the culprit. The longtime janitor was fired and blamed for throwing things out. I stopped stealing for a while and things went back to normal. But I couldn't help peeking in the fridge and seeing all those treats staring me down. The temptation was too much and I grabbed a container belonging to the new girl, Tracy Myers. As I chowed down, one of my coworkers walked in on me, caught me red-handed with Tracy's Tupperware. Instead of calling me out or making a scene, he just left the room without a word. I suppose he knew that no one would believe him. I finished eating right as my pager went off, so I methodically washed my hands and straightened my tie before heading back into the operating room. My newest patient, Tracy, was prepped for me to perform her heart transplant. The only problem was that someone had stolen it from the fridge.
A few years ago, me and my family went on our yearly holiday to Madeira, which is the birthplace of my parents. It was pretty normal for us to go annually, as our grandparents were living there. We would sleep in one of our grandparents' home, and during the day, we would go to festivals. If you do not know much about Madeira, then this story will probably give you a better idea. It's not that a physical thing occurred that holiday. It was just this nightmare that became very real for me as a child. As I said before, I was staying at my grandparents' house while in Madeira. I had a room to myself on the upper floor. It was pretty creepy since my grandmother loved Victorian-style dolls. Once I was able to fall asleep, I had a creepy dream that I can't forget. I woke up and from my bed, I could hear movement on the floor. I looked down to see that the floor was covered in black insects, just crawling around. I could not see the almond brown wood floorboards and began to yell for help. Someone opened my door and I saw my little brother come in, but behind him was a woman in a hideous purple dress. I never saw this woman before, but before my brother even came closer to me, I saw the woman force her hand into his back and tear out his heart. I remember screaming in the dream, and all the woman said was, "Your parents aren't here." And I woke up. I was so scared that I went into the next room where my brother should have been asleep. But because it was dark, I couldn't see him. Well, I was a dumb kid. My anxiety level rose even higher. I ran out, went downstairs, and none of my parents were around. I started to panic more because of what that lady in my dreams said, and I started to cry even more. Then I heard my older brother call my name from up the stairs. The stairs I just ran down. I told him I had a bad dream, and he stayed in my room after showing me that my little brother was snoring away in his bed. The next morning, my brother told my parents how I behaved, so my mother asked me what happened. I told her about the dream with the lady in the hideous purple dress. My mother's face became serious, and she looked worried. I didn't know why, since that was unusual for her. About 2 years later, I was going through my parents' wedding album in our home in Madeira, while I was sorting out the top floor of the house with my younger brother. I noticed that one of the pictures was ripped in half. I thought it was unusual, so I began looking through to see where the other half was. It wasn't in the album. I brushed it off. About an hour later, I was going through one of the drawers in the living room cabinet. I saw this picture of a woman in a purple dress. She looked almost identical to the woman in my dream. It was the same dress. I began to get goosebumps, so I put the album on top of a table and opened it to the page with the teared up picture. I began to shiver once the tear of both pictures fit perfectly well together. With worry, I began to ask my mother who was in the image. All I know to this day is that she is perceived as a witch and fled with my maternal uncle from Madeira soon after the whole community began to believe it. This is possibly all just a coincidence, but it does send a shiver down my spine. I've never met this woman, but she appeared in my dreams. I have no idea on whether or not I will forget the specific details of that dream, especially since I found out more about this woman, who is my aunt-in-law.